Tonight, our story begins not with motion, but with the struggle for stillness. We begin on a line of iron that has not yet learned how to stay straight. Imagine the earliest railroads, the first bold lines of commerce and travel drawn across the landscape. They were a miracle of industrial ambition, but they were built on a foundation of profound and dangerous uncertainty. The rails, thin strips of brittle cast iron, were laid upon stone blocks or rough wooden logs, which in turn rested on the unprepared, often soft, earth. The problem was simple and terrifying. The rails would not stay put. This was the age of the wandering iron. Every time a locomotive, a massive, steaming beast of concentrated weight, rolled over these primitive tracks, a wave of powerful forces was unleashed. A vertical force pushed the rail down into the sleeper. A horizontal or lateral force pushed the rail outward, trying to widen the gauge. A longitudinal force, the friction of the driving wheels, tried to push the rail forward. Under this relentless, multi-directional assault, the entire track would squirm. The rails would shift, creep, and spread apart. The journey was a noisy, jarring, and nerve-wracking affair. The constant, arrhythmic clatter was the sound of the wheels finding and losing the proper line, a constant, percussive conversation about the track's inherent instability. The greatest fear was derailment. A rail that spread just an inch too far, a sleeper that sank into a patch of soft mud, could cause the wheel's flange to lose its grip. The result was catastrophic. A multi-ton locomotive and its train of cars would lurch from the track, tearing up the roadbed and coming to a violent, crashing halt. For the early railroad pioneers, the challenge was not simply building a track, but building a track that would endure. They were in a constant, quiet war against the forces of vibration, thermal expansion, and gravity. Their enemy was entropy, the natural tendency of an ordered line to dissolve back into the chaos of the landscape. The early methods for fastening the rail were inadequate. Small pins or nails were sometimes used, but they lacked the strength to resist the immense lateral forces. The iron would simply shear them off or work them loose. Sometimes, the rail was set into a cast iron chair, which was then bolted to the sleeper, but this system was complex, expensive, and the bolts themselves would often vibrate loose. The problem was fundamental. How do you hold a long, heavy, and dynamic piece of metal in a precise and unyielding position day after day, year after year, under the assault of millions of tons of rolling weight? The solution needed to be simple enough to be installed by the thousand, strong enough to resist immense forces, and yet have just enough give to accommodate the natural breathing of the metal. The eventual answer was not a bolt, not a screw, not a complex chair, but a simple, elegant, and brutally effective wedge of forged metal. The wandering iron was about to be tamed by the humble railroad spike. If you love stories of the past, the kind that remind us how small inventions shaped the world, consider subscribing. We make these videos free so you can fall asleep learning something new about history. Your support helps us keep these quiet stories alive. Now let's get back to the video. The path to the perfect fastener was a slow, deliberate evolution. A story told in cast iron and stressed wood. Before the elegant simplicity of the spike, engineers in Europe, particularly in Great Britain, pursued a different, more complex philosophy. They believed the rail needed to be cradled, not pinned. This led to the invention of the chair system, a monument to the brute force of the early industrial age. Imagine a heavy, cast iron bracket, the chair, bolted securely to a thick wooden or stone sleeper. The rail, with a profile like an inverted T, known as flat-bottomed rail, or a more complex shape, bullhead rail, would rest within this chair. The question then became, how do you secure the rail within its throne? The answer was a simple machine, the wedge. A wooden block called a key, or quoin, was driven horizontally into the gap between the chair and the rail. The immense friction of this wedged connection was what held the rail in place. The sound of track maintenance in this era was the percussive thwack, thwack, thwack of a heavy mallet driving these thousands of wooden keys into their iron chairs. This system was incredibly robust and strong. The massive chairs distributed the load of the train over a wide area of the sleeper, and when properly keyed, the rail was held fast. However, it was also incredibly expensive and labor-intensive. Each point of contact required a heavy cast chair, multiple bolts, and a precisely cut wooden key. Moreover, the system had its own quiet vulnerabilities. The wooden keys would shrink in dry weather, losing their grip and requiring constant retightening. In wet weather, they would swell, sometimes locking themselves into the chair with such force that they were impossible to remove for maintenance. The entire system was a collection of multiple separate parts, each one a potential point of failure. American railroad pioneers, faced with the task of laying thousands of miles of track across a vast and often empty continent, looked at this complex, costly European system and sought a simpler, faster, and more economical solution. They were driven by a philosophy of brutal pragmatism. They began experimenting with simply pinning the rail directly to the wooden sleeper. Early attempts used crude, hand-forged nails or pins, but these lacked the necessary holding power. The breakthrough came from recognizing that the fastener didn't need to be a complex assembly. It could be a single, purpose-built object. It needed the simplicity of a nail, but the strength of a bolt. It needed to be a wedge, but a vertical wedge, one that used the very structure of the wood itself to create its grip. This shift in thinking, from cradling the rail in a chair to pinning it directly with a spike, was a revolutionary act of simplification. It was a uniquely American solution, born of the need to build faster, cheaper, and farther. The age of the complex iron chair was about to give way to the elegant, brutal efficiency of the spike. The railroad spike, as we know it today, was not the product of a committee or a gradual, anonymous evolution. It was a singular invention, a stroke of genius from an American railroad president and engineer named Robert L. Stevens in 1831. Stevens was tasked with building the Camden and Amboy Railroad in New Jersey, and he was dissatisfied with the cumbersome and expensive British chair system. He envisioned a new kind of rail, a tall, flat-bottomed T-rail that could be laid directly onto wooden sleepers, and he knew he needed a new kind of fastener to hold it. The object he designed was the perfect marriage of form and function, a simple piece of metal where every feature served a crucial, well-defined purpose. This was the Stevens spike. The most distinctive feature is its head. It is not a simple, flat nail head. It is an offset head with a thick lip on one side and a flat top. This shape, often called a dog head, is a work of understated brilliance. The flat top provides a perfect, stable target for the blows of a heavy hammer, or spike maul. The underside of the lip is angled to perfectly match the angle of the top of the rail's base, or flange. When driven, this lip presses down on the rail, holding it firm against the sleeper with a powerful clamping force. The offset design also means that the head does not interfere with the train's wheel flange, a critical safety consideration. Next is the shank. A common nail is round, but the railroad spike has a square shank. This is not an arbitrary choice. When a round nail is driven into wood, it simply pushes the fibers apart, weakening the wood around it. A square shank, however, acts like a chisel. It cleanly cuts the wood fibers on 4 sides as it is driven in, minimizing the damage to the sleeper. The uncut wood fibers on all sides then press back firmly against the flat sides of the shank, creating an immense and constant frictional grip that resists being pulled out. Finally, there is the point. The tip of the spike is not a sharp, symmetrical point, like a nail. It is a chisel point with a flat, angled edge. When the spike is driven, this chisel point is oriented so that its edge is perpendicular to the grain of the wooden sleeper. This ensures that the spike cuts across the wood grain rather than acting like a wedge that could split the sleeper apart along its length. Every single element of the Stevens spike, the clamping head, the gripping shank, the non-splitting point, was designed to work in perfect harmony with its 2 partners, the steel rail and the wooden sleeper. It was a complete, self-contained system in a single piece of metal. Its invention was a pivotal moment, an act of such profound and simple insight that its basic form has remained largely unchanged for nearly 200 years. The perfect form of the railroad spike would be meaningless without the perfect material. A spike must possess a unique and seemingly contradictory set of qualities. It must be hard enough to be driven through dense hardwood without bending, yet soft enough that it doesn't shatter under the violent, repeated blows of a spike maul. It must be strong enough to resist the immense shearing forces of a passing train, yet ductile enough to bend slightly under extreme stress rather than snapping. The material that could achieve this delicate balance was not iron, but its stronger, more refined cousin, steel. Early spikes were made from wrought iron, which was tough and malleable, but relatively soft. It could be driven without breaking, but it was prone to bending and could lose its grip over time. Cast iron was hard, but far too brittle. It would shatter like glass under a hammer blow. The answer lay in the precise control of a single magical element, carbon. Steel is, at its heart, simply iron with a small, carefully controlled amount of carbon added to it. This addition transforms the material's crystalline structure, giving it a combination of hardness and toughness that iron alone cannot achieve. The development of new, high-volume steel-making techniques in the mid-19th century, such as the Bessemer process, made high-quality steel cheap and plentiful for the first time. This was the moment the railroad spike came into its own. Spikes are typically made from a medium carbon steel. Too little carbon, and the spike is too soft. Too much carbon, and it becomes brittle. The Goldilocks amount, usually between 0.2% and 0.5% carbon, creates the ideal combination of properties. The process of making a spike is a violent, rhythmic ballet of heat and force. A long bar of steel is heated to a glowing orange-yellow pliability. It is then fed into a machine that, in a series of incredibly fast and powerful motions, cuts a length, forges the chisel point, forms the doghead, and ejects the finished spike to cool. The final step in a spike's life, for certain high-stress applications, like sharp curves or bridges, is heat treatment. The spike is heated again and then quenched or rapidly cooled in oil or water. This process locks the steel's internal structure into a state of heightened hardness and strength. What emerges is an object of profound material integrity. It is a single, solid piece of engineered steel, its internal chemistry perfectly balanced to withstand a lifetime of immense stress. The quiet, dark, and unassuming spike lying in the ballast is the product of the roaring, white-hot heart of the industrial age, a humble object imbued with the silent, unwavering strength of carbon steel. The railroad spike is only one half of a partnership. Its strength, its grip, and its very purpose are defined by the material it is driven into, the wooden sleeper or railroad tie. This humble, rectangular beam of wood is the spike's silent partner, the medium that gives it purchase and allows it to perform its vital work. The relationship between the steel spike and the wooden sleeper is a deep, symbiotic embrace, a perfect pairing of man-made material and the natural world. The choice of wood for a sleeper is critical. It must be a hardwood, dense and strong enough to hold the spike tightly and to bear the crushing weight of the train without being pulverized. Oak, with its strength and durability, has historically been a favorite in North America. Other hardwoods like hickory and maple are also used. The wood must be resilient, able to absorb the constant vibration and shock of passing trains without splitting or shattering. It is this natural elasticity of wood that makes it such an ideal material. Unlike a concrete or stone block, a wooden sleeper has a slight give, a cushioning effect that dampens the violent forces of the train, reducing wear and tear on both the rails and the train's wheels. However, wood has a natural enemy, the elements. An untreated piece of wood left out in the rain and sun, in contact with the damp earth, will quickly fall prey to rot, fungus, and insects. It would lose its structural integrity and its ability to hold a spike in a matter of a few years. To overcome this, the wooden sleeper is imbued with a life-extending elixir, creosote. Creosote is a dark, oily, and pungent preservative distilled from coal tar. The sleepers are loaded into long, pressurized cylinders, and the hot creosote is forced deep into the wood's fibers. This process makes the wood highly resistant to water and toxic to the organisms that would devour it, extending the life of a sleeper from a few years to 30 or 40 years, or even more. The deep, earthy, and slightly chemical smell of a creosote-treated sleeper is one of the most evocative and recognizable scents of the railroad. When a spike is driven into this dense, preserved wood, a powerful bond is formed. The square shank cuts the creosote-infused fibers, and the natural resins and preservatives in the wood immediately press back, creating a tight, water-resistant seal around the steel. The wood grips the spike with a relentless, passive friction. It is this grip, this wooden embrace, that allows the spike to do its job. The sleeper holds the spike, and the spike holds the rail. It is a simple, three-part harmony of steel, wood, and preservation, a quiet partnership that forms the stable, resilient, and enduring foundation for the entire railroad. The railroad spike is an object designed not just to function, but to be installed with brutal efficiency. Its placement is an act of intense, physical, and rhythmic labor. The sound of the railroad being built is the sound of the spike maul, the specialized, long-handled hammer used to drive the spikes. It is a sound of explosive, percussive force, a steady, powerful heartbeat that echoed across the continents, as the great rail lines were laid. The spike maul is a tool of beautiful, simple design. It has a long, slender handle, typically made of hickory, which provides the leverage needed for a powerful swing. The head is a heavy block of forged steel, weighing around 10 pounds. One face is smooth and slightly rounded for driving the spike. The other face is often tapered to a dull point, useful for prying or positioning things. The act of driving a spike is a full-body motion, a dance of balance and power. A track worker would set the spike into a pre-drilled hole in the sleeper, and then, with a few light taps to seat it, would begin the main swing. It is a motion that comes from the legs and the back, a fluid rotational arc that brings the heavy hammerhead down with incredible speed and accuracy onto the small, flat head of the spike. Typically, it takes 3 to 4 powerful, perfectly placed blows to drive a spike home. The sound is sharp and distinct. The first blow produces a high-pitched clang as the steel hammer makes its initial contact with the steel spike. The subsequent blows are deeper, more resonant, a clang thump, as the sound of the steel-on-steel impact is mixed with the sound of the spike being driven deep into the resisting wood of the sleeper. A skilled spiking team, often working in groups, would create a powerful, coordinated rhythm. The call and response chants of these workers, known as Gandhi dancers, would coordinate their hammerfalls, creating a rolling thunder of steel on steel, a human-powered machine that could lay miles of track in a single day. This rhythmic labor was the heart of railroad construction for over a century. It was physically punishing work, performed under the hot sun or in the bitter cold. But it was also a craft. A well-driven spike is not just hammered in. It is seated with precision. The final blow must be perfectly judged to set the spike head firmly against the rail flange without being overdriven, which could damage the wood or the spike itself. Today, much of this work is done by pneumatic or hydraulic spiking machines, which can drive a spike in a single, powerful thrust. But the sound of these machines, a loud, mechanical Ka chunk, lacks the human rhythm and soul of the hand-swung maul. The memory of that steady, powerful clang thump is the memory of the railroad's creation, the audible rhythmic signature of the spike fulfilling its ultimate purpose. The railroad spike is often seen as an object of pure rigidity, a fastener meant to lock the rail in a single, immovable position. But its true genius lies in a much more subtle and sophisticated function. It is a master of controlled movement. The spike's job is not to create an absolutely rigid system, but to manage the immense and irresistible forces of nature, particularly the laws of thermal expansion and lateral pressure. A railroad track is not a static object. It is a living, breathing line of steel, and the spike is the quiet regulator of its breath. The most powerful force a spike must contend with is thermal expansion. A long, continuous piece of steel, like a rail, will expand when heated and contract when cooled. A standard 39-foot section of rail can expand by over a quarter of an inch between a cold winter night and a hot summer day. Over a mile of track, this adds up to several feet of movement. If the rail were bolted down with absolute rigidity, this expansion would create catastrophic buckling forces, twisting the track into a dangerous, snake-like shape known as a sun kink. The traditional way to manage this was to leave a small gap between the ends of each rail section. The spike plays a crucial role in this process. It does not clamp the rail to the sleeper with the unyielding grip of a weld or a high-torque bolt. The dog head holds the rail down, preventing it from lifting, but the frictional grip of the square shank in the wood is designed to allow the rail to slide almost imperceptibly lengthwise as it expands and contracts. This is the spike's quiet genius. It provides immense resistance to vertical and lateral forces while permitting slow, longitudinal movement. The spike allows the track to breathe. The other critical force is lateral pressure. As a train, especially on a curve, speeds along the track, it exerts a massive outward force, trying to push the rail over and widen the gauge. This is where the spike's role as a simple, powerful pin comes into play. The thick, square shank of the spike acts as a shear pin, a block of solid steel resisting this immense sideways force. On sharp curves, extra spikes or specialized tie plates are used to provide even more lateral resistance. The spike holds the line, ensuring the gauge remains true. It is this dual role, resisting the outward push while allowing the lengthwise slide, that makes the spike such an enduring piece of engineering. It is a silent negotiator, constantly balancing the need for stability against the irresistible forces of physics, holding the long iron line in a state of dynamic, resilient equilibrium. The railroad spike is the silent enabler of one of the most iconic and comforting sounds of the industrial age, the clickety-clack of the train. This sound is not the sound of the engine, nor is it the sound of the wheels on a continuous surface. It is the sound of the train crossing the small, deliberate gaps left between the sections of rail, the very gaps that the spike's design allows to exist. It is the audible proof of the track's quiet contract with the laws of physics. The sound is composed of two distinct parts. First comes the clickety, a double sound created as the front and back wheels of a single bogie or truck pass over the rail joint. Then comes the clack, the sound of the wheels on the other side of the same car passing over their corresponding joint. This rhythm, da-da-dum, da-da-dum, is dictated by the precise, unvarying length of the rails. With standard 39-foot rails, this sound repeats with a steady, hypnotic frequency, a mechanical lullaby that has defined overland travel for more than a century. It is the sound of distance being consumed, of progress being made in steady, measurable increments. This sound is a psychological contract with the passenger. It is a rhythm of safety and predictability. Each click-clack is a confirmation that the track is functioning as designed. It is the sound of the expansion gap doing its job, the sound of the spike holding the line true. An absence of this sound, or a change in its rhythm, would be a sign of trouble. A dull thud might indicate a problem with the underlying roadbed. A sharp, metallic bang might signal a broken rail. But the steady, unchanging clickety-clack is the sound of a healthy, stable track. It is the sound of thousands upon thousands of individual spikes, each one silently performing its duty, holding the rails in their proper parallel alignment, separated by just the right amount of space. In the modern era, with the advent of continuously welded rail, CWR, this iconic sound is fading from the main lines. Long ribbons of steel, sometimes a quarter of a mile long or more, are welded together to create a smooth, silent, and seamless surface. This method requires a much more complex fastening system, often involving elastic clips and concrete sleepers, to manage the immense internal stresses created by thermal expansion in a continuous rail. The result is a faster, smoother, and quieter ride, but something is lost. The sound is replaced by a steady, low whoosh or roar. The clickety-clack contract, the audible rhythmic reassurance of the jointed rail and the simple spike, is becoming a sound of the past, a piece of acoustic nostalgia for the golden age of rail travel, a time when every journey was measured out in the steady, comforting beat of steel on steel. On May 10th, 1869, at a remote spot in the Utah desert called Promontory Summit, the simple railroad spike was elevated from a humble piece of hardware to a powerful national symbol. This was the day the final spike was driven to complete the first transcontinental railroad, linking the Central Pacific Railroad from the west with the Union Pacific Railroad from the east. It was a moment of profound significance, the physical and symbolic unification of a nation torn apart by civil war just a few years earlier. The object chosen to represent this monumental achievement was not a plaque or a statue, but the most fundamental component of the railroad itself, the spike. The ceremony was a piece of carefully orchestrated industrial theater. 2 locomotives, the Central Pacific's Jupiter and the Union Pacific's number 119, were brought nose to nose on the final section of track. Dignitaries, workers, and soldiers gathered to witness the final connection. But this was no ordinary spike. Several ceremonial spikes were presented for the occasion. The most famous was a 17.6-carat gold spike, known as the Golden Spike, or the Last Spike. Other spikes of silver and gold-silver iron alloys were also present. The final sleeper itself was a polished laurelwood tie. The act of driving this final spike was fraught with symbolic weight. Railroad magnate Leland Stanford, president of the Central Pacific, was given the honor of the first swing. He swung the heavy silver maul and missed the spike, striking the rail instead, to the amusement of the crowd. Thomas Durant of the Union Pacific also swung and missed. It is possible these misses were intentional, a nod to the fact that they were businessmen, not laborers. The final, symbolic taps were likely made by professional track workers. A telegraph wire had been attached to the final spike and the maul, so that the final hammer blows would be transmitted as a series of clicks across the entire nation. The message DONE flashed from coast to coast, igniting spontaneous celebrations in cities across America. After the ceremony, the precious metal spikes and the laurelwood tie were immediately removed and replaced with a standard iron spike and a wooden sleeper. The golden spike was never meant to hold the track. Its purpose was to hold a moment in history. It transformed the spike from an object of quiet, anonymous labor into an icon of progress, manifest destiny, and the relentless westward expansion of the nation. It was a testament to the thousands of workers, many of them Chinese and Irish immigrants, who had performed the back-breaking labor of laying the track, swinging the hammers, and driving the millions upon millions of common iron spikes that made this single golden one possible. The ceremonial strike at Promontory was the spike's moment of apotheosis, a single, resonant clang that announced to the world that a continent had been conquered and connected by 2 thin lines of iron, held fast by the silent, steadfast grip of the spike. Our journey, which began with the chaos of the wandering iron, ends here, in a state of profound, linear quiet. It ends with the contemplation of the track itself, a perfect, geometric statement of human intention drawn across the vast, curving canvas of the earth. And at the heart of this immense structure, repeated every few inches for thousands upon thousands of miles, is the railroad spike, the silent, unheralded hero of this story. Its work is done in darkness, in the tight, compressive grip of the wooden sleeper, but its effect is the creation of this long, straight, and peaceful silence. The spike endures. Even in the age of high-speed rail, concrete sleepers, and complex elastic fastening systems, the simple, classic doghead spike remains in service on countless miles of track around the world. On secondary lines, in freight yards, and on heritage railways, it continues to perform its duty with the same quiet efficiency it has for nearly 2 centuries. It is a testament to the power of a perfectly realized design, an object so well suited to its purpose that it has resisted fundamental change. Its legacy is not just in the past, but in the present, in every freight train that safely carries goods across the country, in every passenger train that clicks and clacks along a branch line. To stand beside a railroad track and look down its length is a meditative experience. The parallel lines, held in their perfect, unwavering gauge by the spikes, create a powerful illusion of infinity. They are a symbol of the journey, of the connection between 2 distant points, of the path ahead. The spike is the quiet enforcer of this geometric perfection. Each one is a small, solid anchor, a point of stability that, when multiplied by millions, creates a line of unwavering certainty. It is the ultimate expression of the principle that a great and complex system can be built from the simple, relentless repetition of a single, perfect component. The story of the railroad spike is the story of a quiet revolution in solidity. It is the story of how a simple, hardened piece of steel brought order to the chaos of the early railroad, transforming a dangerous, unstable path into a safe and predictable guideway. So, as you settle into the stillness, picture that long, straight line of track stretching to the horizon. Remember the silent, steadfast guardian that makes it all possible. The small, dark, and powerful piece of metal driven deep into the wood, holding the line, absorbing the forces, and keeping the deep linear piece of the rails. All is still, all is straight, and the path is clear. Final fade. The music and sound